Okay, we're continuing with this book, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes. And again, the quotes I'm doing for these videos come from my own personal collection of quotes, which is, about 5 times longer than the book. The old time speakers, they're the ones that are mostly in the book. The newer people, like from the last 100 years, quite often they're not in the book. Okay, so I'm just letting you know that's kind of how it goes, but I want to show you these new people because they're worth knowing about. Okay, the first one here is Arthur Jones. This guy, and this is with his girlfriend, and here's an elephant. He invented the nautilus machines. The nautilus machines were a super big, popular thing back in the 1970s and 1980s. I can remember going to the health clubs. There were nautilus health clubs. And he's the guy who invented them, the elliptical cam, to try to keep you in maximum muscle tension through a wider range of motion. And I liked him. A lot of people liked him. He helped train Mike Menser. He did the Colorado experiment with Casey Viator where he put on lots of muscle fast. He did all kinds of eccentric things. He was a multimillionaire, one of the top 400 richest men in the world. He made his own zoo, and he kept all these baby elephants that had been orphaned from Africa. He kept crocodiles. He did a lot of funny things. He's a very outspoken guy. All right, so now here's some of his quotes. He said, "How would you feel if you lived on an island populated apart from yourself exclusively by retarded, malicious chimpanzees?" Well, that's how I feel. And don't laugh because you're one of those retarded, malicious chimpanzees. Arthur Jones continues, there must surely be a few bodybuilders who are not idiots. But if so, they are well camouflaged in some undiscovered cave. I do not believe in formal education. For learning to occur, it has to come from the person themselves. And I think that's true. In school, where they try to pretend that education means being taught, it's not really true. Education's what you remember. That's what you could use, and that comes from you wanting to learn it or having an experience that's memorable. Okay, Arthur Jones continues. If you like an exercise, you're probably doing it wrong. The fastest way to improve an exercise is to increase the intensity. So he was big on doing high-intensity sets, training to failure. And Mike Menser was sort of one of his proteges, and Mike Menser became very famous for that concept of training to failure and doing fewer sets, but just with more intensity. Okay, a little bit about Michael Jordan. I used to watch all the Michael Jordan basketball games. My dad watched all the games. It was super popular when I was a young guy. Michael Jordan said, I'm going to work harder than anybody else. So he was a real hard-working guy. He was very intensely competitive, and of course he had an incredible natural talent, but he pushed himself. Heart is what separates the good from the great. And I would say, look at medical doctors. There's a lot of ones that are smart enough to get through school and to do their job, make their money, but there's not many that want to go beyond that and try to become great. He says, to be successful when you're young, you have to be selfish, or you'll never achieve. But once you get to the highest levels, you have to be unselfish. Okay, he said, I became such a successful athlete. The reason was my mind was saying that no matter what they put up against me, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be the best. I think that's also true of a lot of great achievers. They have this sense of destiny. So even though life smacks them down and injures them and does other bad things to them, they say, I've got to overcome this, and it's my destiny. And they push themselves harder than other people do. Okay, a little bit on Sister Miriam Joseph. She lived from 1898 to 1982. She was a nun. She wrote a book called The Trivium of Logic, Grammar, and Rhetoric. And those were the standard subjects in the old days. A liberal arts education meant an education for a free man. Teach him how to use his brain. So the Trivium, now people mock it and say, oh, that's trivial. But actually, this is very valuable to use. Logic, like Aristotle. Rhetoric, to speak effectively. The ancient Greeks are the ones who pioneered rhetoric. They just wrote down what all the best speakers did, their speaking techniques. Okay, Sister Miriam Joseph says, the study of the liberal arts perfects the faculties of the mind and the spirit. It brings to fruition the possibilities of human nature. It teaches one how to live. It enables a person to live a free life, gaining truth. One of the things you'll see is a lot of these politicians, especially this hand, the left, they try to tell people, oh, we don't need liberal arts education in the schools. They want to dumb down everybody. You need it, okay? I don't care if you're majored purely in science. You should have this stuff because it makes you much more articulate. It improves your thinking ability. You read the great classics of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans and the Renaissance. No one has a dog in that fight, so you can talk openly. You can't talk openly about politics from the last 100 years because people get all offended if their ancestors were not on the team that you supported or that you agree with. So you really can't talk freely about stuff. But you can talk freely about the ancient Greeks and Romans, and you just see human nature and how it is, and that's valuable to get that. Because people still behave the same as they did in the past. It's just you're not allowed to talk about it. Okay, let's see what she says. The utilitarian or servile arts enable one to be a servant of another person or a corporation to earn a living. In true liberal education, the essential activity of the student is to relate the facts learned into a unified organic whole, to assimilate them as a rose assimilates the food from the soil and increases its size, vitality, and beauty. Yeah, it's a very valuable thing. And I went back to medical school back in the old days when the old guy was a sage on the stage. And almost always, it was a smart old white guy who was cantankerous and grouchy and super smart and would just say the truth out loud. Back in the old days, there were a lot of guys like that. And they ran a lot of medical departments, and they were really good. They didn't have the technology you have nowadays, but they would just say stuff to you, and they would insult you, they would make fun of you, but they would get to the truth. Whereas nowadays, you usually have some wimpy, half-assed conference. There's not that many big dog doctors. And when a great one like myself comes along, they ban them from teaching. They're afraid of them. They don't want them teaching. And I went to Harvard back when Harvard was still Harvard rather than the fake, lefty piece of crap school, and it was rather vulgar and in your face. I can remember surgeons that I was competing against. I was an imaging guided surgeon, minimally invasive surgeon. They didn't like us taking their techniques, and they would kind of get in my face like they were going to kick my ass. It was weird, but that's how it was. Very confrontational, argumentative. And yes, that can be kind of nasty. Yes, that can be kind of unprofessional. But there was a fight to get to the truth and to do what's best for the patients. And in surgery, you could do that a lot more than you can. In medicine, you're just going to sell drugs, okay? But in the surgical fields, there was a big push to try to do things better, and that was a good thing. Okay, Sir Miriam Joseph, the arts of reading, writing, and reckoning have formed the traditional basis of liberal education. Yes, math is quite overrated. Yes, Plato liked math, and there are some benefits in math, but how much do regular people in real life use math? Not very much, okay? It wastes people's time making them study calculus and all this algebra and trigonometry. It's not relevant for most people. Okay, now James Joyce, the Irish writer. Now, James Joyce gets praised as being such a great writer. Let me tell you something. He's totally overrated. Now, I like him because he's Irish. I like him because he was brave in some ways when he was young. He was educated at a Jesuit school. I like all of that. I know why he got pissed off at Christianity in Ireland, because the church turned its back on Parnell, okay, because he had an affair with that lady, Kitty. And I'm sorry that the church turned its back on Parnell. They should not have done that. Parnell was a great leader, kind of like almost like a king of Ireland back in the good old days, all right? But he still then kind of drifted towards atheism, and then he became an alcoholic. He was fooling around with prostitutes. And what I'm saying is, people say, oh, wasn't he a great writer? No, did you actually read his books? His books are a pain in the ass to read. Ulysses is very difficult to read. It's not very pleasant to read. And I can also tell you, when somebody is a great man, they do great things, okay? A great man has noble masculinity. He's uplifting to the people around him. He's not like James Joyce hanging around with F. Scott Fitzgerald, with the expatriates in France and Paris getting drunk, getting into fights, vomiting on themselves, passing out in the gutter. That's not a great man. That's a immature man. That's a frustrated man. And, Ayn Rand had said it too. A great man wants to do good things. He doesn't want to get drunk in the gutter or get in a fight in a bar. That's stupidity, okay? And, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man was a good book. That's a much better book than Ulysses. And the name Daedalus is appropriate, like Michael Subaru, the great philosopher, says, because he's trying to navigate a psychological maze and find a way to escape through it and be able to create art. So I thought that was a cool little concept. Everyone was sad after World War I. World War I was almost like a suicide attempt to Europe. It was a disaster. Okay, he was sad because his daughter had schizophrenia. I can understand the sadness. And what you do with sadness, though, is you try to take that frustration and put that energy into something good. So at least something useful comes out of it, okay? Let's see, for example, I told you my father meant well, but he almost killed me when I was in medical school, and I learned from that experience, okay? And I made videos about it that I hope will help people, okay? Joyce almost went blind, and it was kind of reminiscent of like Milton, who had gone blind and wrote Paradise Lost. Okay, let's get to some more quotes of James Joyce. He does have a couple of good quotes. It was Kitty O'Shea that Parnell had the affair with. Okay. James Joyce, he says, a book can be a door to a new world, a window to see someone else's world, a mirror to see one's own world. Yeah, you read a great book, you can all of a sudden open up a whole new area of knowledge. Like when I read Dr. Anthony Jay's book on estrogen generations, and I'm like, holy crap, this is such a big deal. I can't believe I didn't know about this before. You know, it opened up a whole perspective. When I read Richard Moore's book, High Blood Pressure Solution, about all the ion pumps, I'm like, holy crap, I never understood before how important these things are and how they really work. So those books will totally change your perspective. When I read the big dental books, I'm like, oh my gosh, these are such a big part of disease. Because, you know, John McDougall would say 75% of disease in T. colon Campbell is due to diet. And what I'd say is, I don't know, it's around there, you know, 65%, and then maybe there's this other big thing due to estrogenic chemicals, other toxins in the air, the water, the food, and another big part due to, you know, complications of dental stuff. And then there's other stuff that's not related, you know, things like trauma and stuff. Okay. James Joyce, a man's errors are his portals to discovery. I like that. Learn from your mistakes. History is a nightmare I'm trying to awake from. Yeah, Ireland was enslaved by England for over 1,000 years, and that's why I say sometimes, you know, in America, everybody thinks slavery means black people. No, you don't understand. Slavery has always been present in every single culture since the beginning of time, okay? And it's been happening to Ireland a lot longer than anybody else, okay? The American blacks and other ones, they're freed from slavery, okay? But there's still slavery in black Africa. There's still slavery in the Muslim countries. There's still slavery in India, okay? And the Democratic Party still traffics, you know what? The other word for them is minors, okay? That is still happening, okay? The next thing he says here, when the soul of a man is born in this country, there are nets flung at it to hold it back from flight. I shall try to fly by those nets. Yeah, they try to enslave you in Ireland. They didn't want the Irish, you know, learning the Catholic religion. They didn't want even to learn how to read. They wanted them to just obey or to go to a Protestant school, and they would teach them in little hedgerow schools. Okay. He says, when a man is born in this country polluted... Oh, okay, that's something from mine. I don't want to go my quote right now. Okay, here's James Joyce continuing. The modern writer must be an adventurer above all, willing to take every risk and to be prepared to founder in his effort if need be. In other words, he must write dangerously. Yes, an artist has to have some experience, something worth writing about, but he needs some knowledge. And again, you know, that's why I think Ernest Hemingway didn't reach his potential, despite the fact he had magnificent style, despite the fact he was heroic, and I do like him. But, you know, he needed to put more Christianity in his writing. He's a little hesitant to do that because he knew himself that he was a screw-up, you know, being an alcoholic, and then he kind of ruined himself with all the head trauma, and then he went for electroshock, and he took psych meds, and Hemingway destroyed himself. But he was a heroic man, much more heroic than Joyce was. Joyce was more of an idiot, you know, getting drunk, getting into fights in bars, stupidity. Okay, that's why I can't think of him as a great writer. A great writer is a great man who teaches you about life and who's trying to save their country, like Dostoevsky's trying to save, you know, Russia from drifting into atheism and becoming a crap hole like it did. He tried to save his country. That's noble. Machiavelli tried to save Italy. That is noble. I admire them, okay? Charles Dickens was trying to make England a better place, you know, speaking up for the common man, okay, for the poor in a very Christian way. I admire Charles Dickens, okay? Orwell was trying to help mankind preserve freedom. I admire that. You know, those are heroic men. Okay, James Joyce, all fiction is autobiographical. Beware the horns of a bull, the heels of a horse, and the smile of an Englishman. Yeah, the English double-crossed the Irish so many times. An Irishman needs three things: silence, cunning, and exile. Welcome, O life. I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of my experience, and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. Yep, it's the storytellers, the bards, that keep the history of Ireland alive. And, you know, James Joyce did the best he could, except for if he hadn't become a screw-up alcoholic, he could have been so much better. But he still, you know, he did the best he could. He did a few good things. So I still like him. I just don't think he's up there with the great ones. The only demand I make of my reader is that he should devote his life to reading my works. Okay. All right. So anyways, that's it for James Joyce. I hope you found that helpful.